Hi guys at home, we're having an issue here in the training room. Joshua's working on it though, so we'll be ready to go in a minute.
Those people in our group chat are like, the Zoom call isn't working.
Oh, just, please tell them that it will be in a minute.
I told them.
Thank you.
There we go. I thought that was yours.
I think we're just
Yeah,
waiting
that's
on.
I did my watch.
Can someone at home say something? Testing the speakers in here.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3.
Joshua, yay. Happy holidays. How are we doing?
Good. How you doing?
Good, good. Nice to see you all. Can anyone tell me where we left off last week?
Like page 8.
Page 8? What
Of the
section?
contract. I'm not sure.
I don't think we left off on page 8.
Oh, okay. May have been 4. I'm sorry.
Okay.
The last notes I have are for the L2 appraisal, physical contingencies we were talking about.
Great. All right.
What
So-
page is it?
What's that?
What page is it?
This is probably page 2. Yeah, it's page 2. So the way the contract changed, we'll just talk about the structure for a minute, is that everything that was throughout the entire 10 pages is pretty much outlined on pages 1 and 2 now, with additional information describing the section we're talking about and more verbiage on it in the subsequent corresponding sections throughout the rest of the pages. So even though we're only on page 2, really we're like halfway through the contract as far as terms are concerned in the previous layout that we had on our previous RPA. So, all right, we were talking about appraisal and loan contingency and the relationship between the two and why appraisal needs to be shorter than loan, because we need an appraisal for at least a minimum of 3 days prior to being able to actually obtain formal loan approval. Because formal loan approval is dependent upon the appraisal being received and reviewed by an independent underwriting department. So we'll move on to L3, which is investigation of property. Also continuously, very erroneously referred to as physical investigation contingency. The physical investigation contingency is a small portion of fire investigation contingency. And if you want to have clarification as to the different parts or branches of what consists or what the buyer investigation contingency consists of, you can very easily see this by looking at a contingency removal form. The acronym for that on zip forms is CR. So under the buyer investigation contingency, we have preliminary title report, we have a buyer's physical investigation, we have HOA document review. So it has multiple parts to it. You can think of, the buyer investigation contingency as a tree. You are able to lift sections of the buyer investigation contingency without lifting the whole thing. So I want you guys to be very, very clear and aware that buyer physical contingency is only a small portion of investigation. Knowing this can help you. It can help you really navigate some tricky waters if you need more time on investigation, because agents constantly erroneously referring to buyer investigation as buyer physical contingency or buyer physical investigation when they are extending or changing, countering terms in a contract. Let's say you got a counter offer to an offer that you wrote, and they say the buyer's physical contingency is to be, and maybe they make it a shorter time frame. Well, technically, they didn't alter the buyer investigation contingency timeframe you wrote in your contract, did they? They only altered a very small portion, one of the branches of that tree. So when they're trying to enforce that, perhaps your buyer lifts that contingency. Let's say they've made it a 7-day, and in your original contract under section L3, you wrote 10 days, 14 days. Well, you're right, and they're wrong, and they can't do anything about it. So you have contingency protection for that time frame if they've, like most agents, erroneously just countered the physical contingency. Does that make sense to you guys?
Absolutely.
Okay, so this is an ace in your pocket. This is a fuck you. This is a win, but that is not how we operate. We don't do well when we burn relationships with agents in this business, right? So, though I'm telling you that's an ace in the pocket, and you're right, we do so, we let other agents know courteously, right? It's a, I'm right, you're wrong, sorry about that, let's move on and work together politely kind of thing. It's very important. It's not about being right. It's not about, you know, the battle. It's about the war, which is your entire career. So make sure, no matter what you do, if you're using these, you know, kind of slippery tricks and tips, that you do so, you know, with grace. All right. So back to investigation of property. What can anyone tell me what the typical time frame you might offer in your initial offer as far as the investigation contingency timeframe? No one? Gabby?
14 days?
Yeah, it could be 14 days. Somewhere, okay, so on the really competitive end, really the only way to actually get it done if you need to investigate, and most of the time you do, a non-contingent offer is a very tricky thing to do, and most people don't do it properly. There's almost no such thing. And I'll elaborate on that in a second. Would be 7 days on the short end, and typically 14 on the long end. And that would depend upon the size of the property and the type of the property. So if there's a condo that you're writing an offer on, you could probably get your buyer investigation done in about 7 days. And that is because you need fewer inspections, okay? It is smaller. You don't have a sewer line. A lot of the things you could inspect on a single family are covered by HOA. So we're not doing a roof inspection, right, on a condo for the most part. They don't have a sewer line that's just there, so we're not doing a sewer line inspection. You may or may not want to do termite inspection, depending upon the buyer. It would just be for the interior of the property. You may or may not do a chimney or fireplace inspection, depending upon if there is one there. If there's a pool, that's common area, you're not doing a pool inspection. So really we're doing a general, sometimes a termite, perhaps a chimney. But with a single family, we are doing all of the stuff. So with a single family home, we're doing a general. We're doing a termite. We're doing a chimney if there is one. We're doing a sewer line inspection. Sorry, did I already say that? So sewer, termite, general, chimney if there is one, pool if there is one. If the property's on a hillside, most likely a geo. And if there's any issues with any of those things, those initial, what I call core inspections, might require the inspector in those cases might recommend a secondary inspection. You know, oh, the roof looks a little worn here, so you need a roof inspection. Oh, there's an issue with the foundation. That's a big issue. You'll need a foundation inspection or a structural inspection, that type of thing. So in those cases where you have a single family, I would say 10 is about the shortest you can go. Up to 14 would be considered kind of industry acceptable. Now, if you have a very large estate home, you know, something that's really big, we can look into the, you know, 17 and up to 21 day mark, depending upon the size and type of the property and what's there. So these are things you need to keep in mind when you're writing these timeframes in here. Okay. And so we talked about, you know, offers that are made non-contingent or with some contingencies removed. So let's say I write an offer on a property that's a condominium. And let's say I waive all of the contingencies with my offer, not something I would probably do very often. And if I am, it's for generally a developer client. But technically, that's not even really going to be the case, because most likely the listing agent did not provide me with preliminary title report, building report, HOA docs up front. So when the seller is delivering required documents to you after a contingency has expired, or if in the case that a contingency has been waived, guess what? The buyer automatically gets 5 days of review where a, you know, basically new contingency time frame is introduced. So I do about once a year teach a whole class on, you know, how to make or, receive and accept a truly contingency-free offer, just know that if you get anything that is covered in one of the contingencies after it's been lifted, you actually get 5 additional days, or it's delivered after it's expired but not lifted. So let's say I had a contingency timeframe, a buyer investigation that expired yesterday, yet the listing agent is delivering HOA documents to me tomorrow. I have 5 days from tomorrow before they can enforce that timeframe, because they provided me something outside of the contingency timeframe. So I get 5 days. That is a contractual term that is written into our RPA. Okay. All right. Informational access to the property. So in the old RPA, this used to be a couple paragraphs apart. And the difference between this is access for investigation of property. So that's that first time frame. And second is just access period. Just access period to the property. So I used to, go through an escrow, and maybe the seller lives there, I'm repping the buyer, and we do our inspections, everything's good, we have everything we need, we lift all of our contingencies, but my buyer wants to get their father in there and maybe take some measurements for a window. This section, informational access to the property, was separate. And because it was separate, people always left this time frame, these dates alone. They never even thought about it. So if the listing agent tried to tell me no, I was like, oh, well, sorry. Our contract says I have 17 days and I'm still within that 17-day time frame. Now that they've put them back together, it's more likely that a listing agent is going to pay attention to this and possibly match informational access to the time frame that's an investigation access. Why a seller probably doesn't want continual interruption and people entering their home. So, they may or may not start utilizing this more, which can affect your buyers, because now all of a sudden, oops, no, I can't get the buyer in necessarily, for things that aren't necessary or related to investigation of the property.
So Kristen, if you
yes.
don't put a time frame in that slot, it is 17
Yes,
days.
it is 17 by default, but good luck getting your offer accepted with it saying 17. Unless, like I said, it's a massive estate home. All right. L4, review of seller documents. This is also referred to as seller disclosure contingency. Can anyone tell me what the typical time frame on this is? So it used to be 7. It wasn't as clearly identified as it is now, right? So it's breaking apart seller documents, title report, and common interest disclosures, which are referred to as HOA docs, okay? So this used to all be really part of the seller disclosure contingency. And I'm glad that they broke them apart. And the reason for that is because the seller disclosures and the preliminary title report usually come out much more quickly than the HOA documents. The reason for this is most HOAs have a management company and they don't care. They don't care. Make sure you review all HOA document packages, because I haven't seen one in at least 3 years that had all the documents in it that are supposed to legally be required and be there. And it is your job as the agent to look at that and make sure that they're delivered, okay? There is actual legal code, and there used to be a section in the residential purchase agreement that identified what those documents are. But if you are in doubt, go to Pele in our office. She's an escrow officer. Escrow orders HOA documents on behalf of the seller from the HOA management company, and she can tell you, she can itemize, give you a list out of what those required documents are, okay? Let's see here. So seller documents are things like seller disclosures, the transfer disclosure statement, the seller property questionnaire, the lead-based paint disclosure. And if you're not familiar with that, that's okay. These are just standard documents that are required in every sale. We do have checklists in the office and KW command, so you can always refer to that. You can go to Brian Chung, the transaction coordinator in the office, and ask him for a copy of our checklist. And it used to be in the old RPA, the boilerplate timeframe on there was 7 days, and most people left that alone. I never leave it alone. I always shorten it if I'm writing for the buyer. And the reason is because I'd like to have those documents quickly, because this is where the seller discloses things they might know were wrong or have been fixed with the property. And why might I want those quickly? I want those quickly because I want to identify any potential issues and make sure that I ask my buyer's inspector to take a really close look at that. And since buyers, getting the buyer inspections done is one of the contingencies that sellers and listing agents like to have the shortest. If I have a 7 or 10 day physical or buyer investigation contingency, but I don't get the seller disclosures until day 7, well, leaving myself 3 days, the difference between 7 and 10 is really bad for me, because either I have inspections quickly, which I need to do, because if the inspectors point out anything I need secondary inspections on, I need time to arrange those. They're not always fast or easy to arrange. So I've now had my inspection without reviewing these documents that might have information on it that I want the inspector to look at. So I generally shorten this seller document contingency to 3 days or so. 3 days or so. Okay, so preliminary title report, 17 days is also way too long. I would say that anything between 3 and 5 days for L4 and L5 is pretty acceptable. Okay. So this is very different than what I've taught in the past, because this was all lumped together. I knew that stuff was going to come after this deadline. Totally fine for me if I'm representing the buyer, because I get 5 automatic days if it comes late, with protection, contingency protection, automatically put back in place for me. I know that the HOA documents are going to come back later. What did I want? I want the seller disclosure package so that I can review that and have the inspector check that stuff out. So review of seller documents, you probably want between 3 and 5 days. And if a listing agent ever gives you a hard time about that, you can have exactly this conversation. I really like to have the seller disclosures prior to my buyer's inspections being done, so I can have the inspector check anything out that might be on there. Okay. And now that we have the new RPA listing agent, that's fine, because we have a whole other section that identifies a separate time frame for the HOA documents. So preliminary title report, I would say 7 days or fewer is probably totally fine. L6, and they'll probably get it to you faster than that. L6 common interest disclosures are HOA docs. Man, 17 days is a long time. I would probably say 10, knowing I'm most likely not going to get them in 10, but I'd like to aim for it. And if I contractually bind the listing agent to that, well, then if I get them later, all it does is buy me time as a buyer's agent. Yes.
So then if they send it to you later, you'd get the standard 5 days after that.
Yeah. So let's say I wrote a 10-day for the common interest disclosures. I got them on day 12. Well, it's actually day 17 now that I have protection to review these under. Okay, before they can enforce what's called the notice to perform, a document that says, hey, buyer's agent, you're outside of your contingency time frame, and if you don't lift your contingency within the next 2 days, we have the right to cancel on you. It's not that simple. Cancellation always has to be mutual, but technically they can bark at that point. So yeah, I think I'd go for 10 on HOA documents, knowing that it might still come a little bit later, but it is what it is. So if you're a listing agent, when's a great time to order HOA documents? Prior to entering escrow. Same thing with title report. I like to order title report, HOA documents, retrofitting inspection and certification work, and building report prior to going to market. I also like to get my seller disclosures completed prior to going to market. And that is because I, as a listing agent, find out a bunch of stuff I don't otherwise know that could hurt my escrow or my seller's purchase price. So let's say, for instance, I have a seller, we're doing the seller disclosure package, and he's like, oh yeah, that fireplace is not safe to operate. I've never operated it. I've known that since I bought it. That's how it was when I bought it. Well, it's very easy for me then to place the listing on the market and say fireplace is decorative only. It's not safely operable. Seller will provide no credit in relation to that. And then nobody cares at the time they make the offer. They're just happy to get their offer accepted. They're not asking for anything in relation to that. Now, if I don't know that, and I don't say that up front, that buyer is going to have a fireplace inspection, and they are going to try to ask for a credit. And it could lead to cancellation of my escrow. It could lead to a credit, which would mean that my seller nets less money, right? It's all about planning ahead of time. So be a good listing agent, get the information for yourself so you can strategically market the property so that it benefits your client the best or the most. All right. Review of leased or liened items. This is not super common, but it does come up. And I promise you at some point in your career, you'll deal with this. And this is something like, the property owner has solar panels and they don't actually own them. They're leasing them from the company, or it's on a payment plan, that type of thing. This is going to be really important for you to know, because the buyer will have to know what the terms are. They'll have to assume them if it's assumable. On a very rare occasion, a solar panel company will not allow a buyer to assume it, and the seller will actually have to pay off the remaining balance of the cost of those solar panels. So you'll want to know that up front, because it might make it so that your seller can't actually really sell their home and follow through on the plans that they had after their sale. Also, there are recorded documents in relation to this, just like a loan from a bank is recorded against title of a property. The loan for these solar panels, or any equipment that is leased or liened, is also recorded against title of property. You're going to have to get transfer documents. It takes a while to get, and then they have to be approved by the buyer. And then at your closing, they're going to have to be recorded documents transferring, taking those liens off as well, depending upon, is it being transferred to the new owner, or is it being paid off and reconveyed is the term. Reconveyed means it's satisfied, it's now coming off of title. Okay. So yeah, anytime you see something like that, when you're dealing with income property, which by the way is a different contract, residential income purchase agreement, RIPA, which has also gone through the same type of facelift as this. If you understand the the regular RPA well, you'll have no problem understanding these other variations of the purchase contract. You'll just want to pay close attention to the factors within that purchase agreement that really are specific to that type of property, such as residential income. There's probably going to be sections about tenants and security deposits and vacancies and and tenancy and stuff like that. That is not going to be here. But if you understand this well, you'll be in very good shape if you have to address one of those types of purchase agreements. So in residential income property, sometimes you'll have like a communal laundry room. Sometimes the owner won't actually own those washers and dryers. Sometimes water softeners. Anytime you see a very high, high value item that's been installed, one of the first things you want to do is ask the seller, do you own those? Are you leasing those? Are they liened? Are they, are they on installment payment? That kind of thing. Let's see. Sale of buyer's property. All right. So L8 is about what we refer to, and it's very confusing, as making a contingent offer. And why is this confusing? Because every offer has tons of contingencies. Okay. But when someone says, oh yeah, I received, or we're making a contingent offer, that means that the buyer needs to sell their home, and it can be anywhere in process, not on the market yet, about to come on the market, in escrow, about to close. And that makes a huge difference, right? If I'm writing an offer that's contingent, where my buyer's under contract, their buyer has lifted all the contingencies and we're closing in a week, I have an estimated, proceed sheet from escrow on their closing to show this property seller, what will be netting. This is how we're going to pay for your home. It's a lot different than, I just put it on the market and we haven't accepted an offer yet, right? There's a big difference in strength. In the first situation, this contingency might be a few days, probably covered within the physical inspection, the other contingencies that we have. So maybe a seller and a listing agent are much more open to receiving my offer in that instance, whereas something that's just gone on the market, that's a wild card. That's a very weak offer. Why would a seller and listing agent contractually bind themselves to a buyer they have no idea will have the financial ability to pay? And if they didn't need to sell their home in order to buy, then why do they need to make their offer contingent? They don't, right? They don't. So this car form COP, I said this before, it's still the same. It is one of the most complicated documents that is in zip forms, period. And that is because the layout of it has all of these, different check boxes. It can mean this or this. Well, it affects multiple things within the terms of your residential purchase agreement. So you have to constantly flip back. And it's sort of like a domino effect. It is not, because it's a seller's market, it's a strong market. Again, it's not common to make contingent offers right now. I can almost guarantee you that if our market shifts into a buyer's market, the state of California is going to revise this document like crazy because it scares me. I read it 55 times before I even try to fill it out or explain it to my client. So if you have to deal with a contingent offer, definitely make sure you talk to someone like Mike Rosales or myself before you do that. And bring me food because I will not want to do it. Okay? I will not want to do it. Bribe me. M1, time of possession. Okay, so the way that the RPA was written before was that, on the day that a property records, which means title of the property is transferred into the buyer's name. Recording can happen anytime during business hours. The title company takes care of this with the county recorder's office. And the way our contract boilerplate was laid out before was that no matter what time we got confirmation of this recording process, that technically delivery of possession to the new owner, the buyer, did not have to take place until 6 p.m. on that day. All right, so a lot of times you would see, especially more skilled agents, they would actually modify that section and say upon notice or confirmation of recording. So they've actually altered our new residential purchase agreement for the default to be a notice of recordation, which is confirmation of recording. Okay. Confirmation of closing. So that is a huge difference. Or 6 p.m. Well, I don't know about you, but I plan on still on altering the new format to say 6 p.m. Why? Well, I have a busy day. I don't know about you, but I can't drop everything I'm doing and go get keys to another agent or get my client in. They're going to be so excited, right? They want to go right away. I don't have the ability to do that. I liked that it was 6 p.m. because I would very courteously do my absolute best to get the keys over to them as soon as I could after confirmation of recording. But there are some days I was just too busy and I could not. So I loved that 6 p.m. Or how many times has something gone wrong during a move? How many times have movers shown up late? How many times has the seller underestimated how much cleaning they've needed to do, once their appliances have been moved out that have been sitting there for 10 years? Often. So yeah, maybe their move is done, but wow, they need to deliver possession of the property with the property clean. It needs to be clean, not just empty, but also clean. So sometimes that extra few hours can make all the difference for a seller. And as far as, for the buyer, also making sure they're happy and they receive the property in the condition it should be received in. Again, this is all, up to you. I'm just sharing my perspective on it with you. You're welcome to leave it as is. And in the case that, you're selling an unoccupied property, there's no reason to change this unless you're like me and you have 5 double booked appointments every day. And you're like, well, I really need I need that 6 p.m. Allowance just in case I have to exercise it.
6 p.m. the latest. That's why.
You can alter it to whatever you want. You could check this box here and put in any time, an hour you want. However, I would highly advise against making it too early because remember that confirmation of recording can happen anytime really during business hours. So if you say confirmation delivery should be at 11 a.m. on the day of closing, well, what if you don't have confirmation of closing yet? What if something goes wrong? What if you deliver possession to the buyer and yet, that recording was pulled because there was a notary wrong on the grant deed or something like that, right? So I would caution you against making that too early.
Later?
Later's fine, but a buyer and buyer's agent are probably going to be like, huh, why? Yeah, so I probably would recommend leaving it as it is or choosing the 6 p.m. option. Okay, seller occupied or vacant units. All right, so we have something referred to as a rent back or a lease back, as well as a delayed delivery of possession. Okay, so the way time of possession has been altered, we talked about that, but there used to be an option, and I don't know, I can't remember if it's on here somewhere. We'll look through. There used to be a way also to do a delayed delivery of possession, and that wasn't hours, that was like a couple days. Like sometimes we would pre-negotiate, at the time we're making an offer or countering, seller's going to deliver possession, a day or two later than recording. Okay, so for that, we didn't usually charge anything. We didn't really go into anything. But when you are doing a rent back or a lease back, there's 2 options, one for 29 days or less or 30 days or more. And the reason for that is legally, once someone has possession of a property that they don't own for 30 or more days, there is an automatic within the state of California landlord-tenancy relationship created. That is a lease, whether there is a formal lease agreement or not, with huge legal ramifications, especially when we were impacted by issues during COVID, the pandemic, right? So what's the process for getting someone out of the house if we're 29 days or less? Technically, if they don't get out when they're supposed to, under 30 days, it's trespassing. I don't know if this would go down this way where you call the police and they get them out, probably not. But you probably wouldn't get in as much trouble if you went in, changed the locks and just started moving your own shit in your new house. And we're like, well, we'll just like kind of push you out into the driveway and see what happens. I've never heard of that. I've never seen that happen. Thank God. I hope I never do. But after the 30 or more day mark, I have to go through formal legal eviction to get rid of you. Now I have to find a place to live that I probably don't have. I have to pay a mortgage on a home where the former owners are now my tenants by accident and evict them. And I have to pay that mortgage the entire time. Huge problem, right? So when people ask me, which, and the most common request for a lease back is 30 days. When people ask me for 30, I say, how about 29? Because let's avoid the, possible issues with creating a landlord tenancy relationship. Now, lease backs, rent backs, whatever you want to call it, they can be done for what's called consideration money, or it can be part of a term of an offer you're making to make your offer more attractive, free, right? And this can be a flat rate per diem. It can be a monthly rate if it's going to be, over 30 days. The most common is calculated on what's referred to as PITI, which stands for principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. Okay, principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. And if it's a condo, also HOA dues. Now, when you are writing an offer, this is very problematic because we do not know what the new buyer, we don't know what their PITI is going to be. We don't know how much they're borrowing until much later in the contract. We don't know what their interest rate will be until it's locked. We don't know what their taxes will be until we know what the final purchase price is, which could get changed during the course of escrow, right? Along with the insurance, it would be slightly, but it would change. So when I have to write a contract with a lease back, what I generally do is I ignore this section and I use a free form section. And I say that buyer and seller mutually agree to exercise and, execute and complete. And depending upon if it's under 30 days, I'm going to use car form SIP. And if it's 30 or more, I'm going to use car form RLAS. One is seller to remain in possession. One is residential lease after sale. And I identify the terms. So what I do is I'll actually print out whichever form it is I need to use. I'll look at all the criteria of what needs to be identified. And that's generally who's paying for maintenance. Is there going to be a security deposit? Is escrow going to hold it? And I will actually write all of these terms out within a free form section or an addendum to the purchase contract. And the reason I'm doing that is because I cannot write these forms yet because I don't know what my monetary figure is. I don't know what my per diem rate is. I won't know that for a few weeks. So I'll usually say something like escrow is to identify, escrow must identify buyer's actual PITI as soon as possible. And buyer and seller mutually agree to execute car form, whatever it is, SIP or RLAS, within 2 days of escrow providing this verified per diem rate for the PITI with the following terms. And I'll identify that, seller is to pay for and continue to maintain the property during, the entire term of the lease back. So I'll go through all of that. And I don't like to reinvent the wheel. So I'll oftentimes copy the language of all of these terms that are on car form SIP or RLAS. I know it's very complicated, but unfortunately, because of the per diem rate, the costs that the buyer is charging the seller for this lease back being based on the buyer's actual carrying cost, which is that PITI, which we cannot define at the time we're making an offer. It is not possible to complete an RLAS or SIP at the actual carrying cost rate accurately. It's just not possible. So you can either come to a round figure and do it, actually complete one of these documents with your offer, or you can do it my way and identify all of the terms, with a term being that buyer and seller will execute it based on this rate when this rate is provided to us. Make sense? Yes, no? Okay. All right. Tenant occupied units. All right. So if a buyer purchases a property that a tenant lives in, okay, there's two options. Either the seller can deliver the property vacant, or they can deliver the property occupied. If the seller has a lease agreement with the tenant, they cannot force the tenant to get out. So this is tricky. They have to do it willingly. And there is this form. It used to be TIP, I think, tenant to remain in possession. Now it is TOPA. It is very well written. It will ask you things like, how many days does the seller have to have the tenant out prior to closing? This is really important, right? You don't want to fund a loan or do too much work. If the seller can't actually get rid of this tenant, you might not complete the purchase, right? These timeframes are really important, but this is a very well-written document, so I'm not going to go into it, because when you read it, you're going to understand it. It's going to feel good to you. Okay. Just keep in mind that if there's a tenant occupied property, this document needs to be completed. Okay, whether or not it's being delivered vacant or not. And if there is an active lease in place and the buyer is going to purchase the property with the tenant remaining in possession, they inherit the terms of the lease. They cannot violate them. Okay, they are subject to all of the terms and timeframes within that lease agreement. So one of the other things on this form will be that the seller will provide the buyer, as a contingency of the sale, copy of the lease agreement, what's called an estoppel certificate, where the tenant actually verifies, yes, this is my monthly rent. This is what's included. This is where my parking is. Yeah, that was my security deposit. Security deposit is transferred through escrow to the new owner, and the per diem rate, the proration on the rent. So let's say the tenant pays rent on the 1st, but we're closing on the 15th. Well, guess what? Escrow is going to work out that per diem rate of what is left, and they're going to transfer that dollar amount for the remaining 15 days of the month, or however many days it is, to the new owner. So these forms are really important. Okay. Document fees compliance, seller delivery of documents. We've already talked about that. That's basically the seller disclosure contingency. So I am a little unclear after looking at this as to review of seller documents. I'm thinking that they actually mean preliminary title report, building report, retrofitting documents here, and that would make much more sense. Remember, I told you sometimes those are just going to come after no matter what. So I'm thinking that this review of seller documents, you might actually, I might have told you wrong. I wouldn't put the 3 to 5 here. This would probably stay somewhere between 10 and 14, I would think. 10 and 14. Okay, so L4, 10 and 14.
So Kristen, I have a question. So say if we're in this situation and we get kind of lost on, say like L4, who could we go to for that?
Your mentor should be able to help you. I'll be able to help you. Mike Rosales would be able to help you.
Okay.
There's also extensive information on CAR's website
Mhm.
that talks about these changes, okay? But, just make a note now. You're in this class. This class will be recorded. I got it fixed, guys. So the office is putting all my recorded classes for the last 6 months on YouTube. So that'll be back there. Sorry about that. I didn't know it was happening. So investigation of L4. Yeah, this is going to mean seller required reports like NHD, things like that. Things that escrow and title might create for the seller that are technically the seller's responsibility to get to you. Whereas down here now under N1, seller delivery of documents, this would be seller disclosures. Okay, and so this would be where you put that 3 to 5 day time frame. Okay.
Which one is that 3 to 5 days?
N1, yeah, here. Yeah. All right, N2, sign and return escrow holder general provisions, supplemental instructions. Fancy words for escrow instructions. Why did they put this in here? They put this in here actually at the last major redraft of residential purchase agreement. And we don't really care about it. They just put it in here because escrow was like, everyone sucks. They don't give us our documents back, and then we have 1 day to do what we should have had, 25 days to do. So here's the thing, be a good agent and just tell your clients always, escrow is very important. Anything that they give to you, as quickly as you can, please complete it and get it back to them. They move our heaven and earth. Be nice to your escrow officer. I am biased. It used to be my job. There's a reason it's no longer my job. It is the least paid, the shittiest job. You get blamed for everyone's fuck ups. You work 24/7 and your check is about 10% of what ours is. And who cuts that check? Your escrow officer. And that is why I'm here today, because I wanted that check, not the one I was receiving. The one I was cutting, not the one I was receiving. So it is a hard job. Your escrow officer is so smart. They will know more than you ever will. Okay. More than you ever will, and they will help you, and they can make or break everything. If I really like you and I choose on Friday night to sit in rush hour traffic and drive your docs out to a funder when your lender fucked up and it wasn't even my fault, that's because I like you. If I don't like you, I probably won't do that. Okay, so escrow moves heaven and earth. Make sure that your buyer and seller are responsive to them and give them the respect that they deserve. And please do not ask them for discounts. They make jack shit money, I can tell you. Everyone hits them up for a discount. Those poor people make nothing anyways, and they don't get all of the escrow fee. Their company gets part of it. And I think their splits are way worse than ours. Okay, let's see here. Different personality type,
Yeah.
but I mean, some people make the transfer over. They do enough of our job, because if the buyer agent or listing agent sucks and doesn't know how to do their job, well, escrow's still done theirs to get their check done. They got to help you finish yours or actually do it for you. So a lot of them do make that jump. But I would say escrow officers are more probably technically skilled, and they're probably less, charming. They're probably less good with people. It's just a different strength, a different personality type. So I think a lot of them, they think, oh, going out and going to get clients, I don't want to do that. And that's probably the big difference between who might want to stay in escrow and who doesn't. Yeah, but you can do it. And I was also very young. I mean, not to say anything to those of you who are young or discourage you, but I still have people who are like, you're a puppy, you're going to sell my house. And I'm like, I'm almost 40 and I've been doing this 20 years. I'm not a puppy, I'm a wolf. Woohoo. And I am going to not only sell your house, but at a higher price than everyone else. So for me, as an escrow assistant and an officer hiding in my office behind a phone and sounding very smart and nobody getting to see my very young face was quite an advantage to me because no one questioned me. Let's see here. So time to pay fees for ordering HOA documents. All right, so escrow goes to order HOA documents. The HOA management company sucks anyways. They're not going to get you all the documents. They're going to pretend like they don't have them. They're going to be like, what, huh? Me? But also sometimes they're going to make it difficult and they're going to say, oh, well, we require payment up front. Most of them will let the seller pay with credit card. Most good escrow officers will arrange that with your seller directly and you won't usually be involved. On a rare occasion, and I just had this, yesterday, there was a company who would only take check. Client is out of town. My lender was going to cover it, but he's out of town. So I just wrote the check for my client and they Zelled me. And I FedExed it to them so that I wouldn't lose time. So that's why time to pay fees for ordering HOA documents is in here 3 days after acceptance. That is contractually binding the seller to making sure that that payment takes place quickly. So if you are a listing agent, again, please just order your HOA documents before you open escrow. Better yet, open them prior to going on market and read them because there might be problems that you might need to address and, might affect the plan you had for marketing the property. Yes.
None of that goes into like the earnest money, that goes, the earnest money goes to your offer.
Earnest money deposit is a buyer's money, so we can't pay a seller's fee with it.
Oh,
There are escrow companies who will draft an amendment and occasionally do that, but they're really not supposed to. What happens if that deal cancels and the seller has to bring in cash? And as a listing agent, again, you just really want to see the information that's in there. If you have a listing and you see that the HOA reserve account for a 50-unit building has $3,000 in it, you're going to have some problems selling that property. Why? First off, a buyer is going to be afraid. If anything needs to be done, there's going to be a huge special assessment most likely. But even more importantly, a lender is probably not going to be willing to fund a loan for a buyer, and they're not going to find that out until halfway through the escrow. So now here you are, 15 days under contract, falling out of escrow, going back on the market, having to explain this to a new buyer. Not good for you or the seller, and something you could have known about up front. So you could have advised your seller, could have posted that you have to have a cash buyer or a non-traditional loan buyer. And you guys probably could have, the seller would have agreed, just price the property a little bit lower. I don't know how much lower. Maybe, I'm just picking a random number and you should not use this number. Let's say the seller says, okay, I see what you're saying. I understand why it's a problem. Let's just put the property on the market for 25,000 less and disclose this up front so that when we end up in escrow, we actually close, right? Versus falling out of escrow, chasing the market down, price reduction, price reduction, price reduction, maybe not selling. Days on market are really hurtful to a seller. So again, really important that you know what you're doing before you put a property on the market, and you can't without the information. There's a lot of information out, variables outside of your control that can truly kill the deal. All right. Install smoke alarm, CO, carbon monoxide detectors, water heater bracing. So if you're selling a property in the city of Los Angeles, we have a retrofitting requirement. Okay, it's called the certificate of compliance. We hire these companies that have certification with the city, that have been approved by the city to go out and inspect what are referred to, and this is a general term, as retrofitting requirements. Retrofitting means taking something and upgrading it to a certain safety standard. Okay, so in the city of Los Angeles, we have things like automatic gas shutoff valves on gas lines. We require smoke detectors and CO2 detectors in certain locations that are operable. No, GFI outlets are not one of them. Water heater strapping, it's got to not just be strapped, it has to be strapped appropriately. And I think it's double strapping. Technically, they're supposed, properties are supposed to have low flow water devices, although I haven't seen a retrofitter actually check that in forever. And some other things as well. So a listing agent generally does this during the course of escrow. It's not usually a problem. The seller typically pays for it. That is negotiated in the contract, but the seller typically pays for the work. The reason for that is they don't know what work needs to be done, right? This certificate gets signed off on, it gets given to the buyer, and escrow will not close without it. But, this could also be a potential deal killer. What happens if they don't have a gas shutoff valve installed on an HOA on a condo unit? We need to go through the HOA, right? Permits need to be pulled. This can be a time-consuming process. It's not common. I've had it happen to me a couple of times, but it did delay my escrow. And, if it's delayed enough, could it potentially kill a deal? It absolutely could. So getting the certificate of compliance out should have been covered under the seller report, the seller disclosure contingency, basically. But a lot of listing agents don't do this, like I said, until a lot of times when the buyer lifts contingencies, because they're like, oh, I don't want to make the seller do work and pay for something before we know we're going to close. Get it ahead of time or right when you first open escrow. Okay. Why? Not only that is if your buyer's buying with a loan, they're going to have an appraisal. If the appraiser sees one of these things wrong, they might not release the appraisal until it's done, and they might charge a reinspection fee on the appraisal, which technically the seller should do, which I think is why we now have section N4 that says this needs to be done within a certain days of acceptance, because agents were fighting about this. The appraiser goes out and says, I'm not releasing the appraisal because there's smoke detectors missing all over the place. I'm just not doing it. And everyone says, okay, well, seller's going to do it now. Seller does it. And then we contact the appraiser and they say, great, that's going to be another $250. And the buyer's like, what? I'm not paying you. It's not my fault that it wasn't ready. Right. So I think this is why this is in here now, which, like I said, if you're a good listing agent, you'll probably do this prior to going to market or as soon as you go on market. But at a very minimum now, they have a seller is bound contractually because of this new introduction to our new RPA to do it within a certain days after acceptance. So what does anyone remember what our typical appraisal timeframe is? Appraisal contingency timeframe is probably 10 to 14, possibly up to 17, but 10 to 14 in this very competitive market is normal. Okay, so can appraiser do it sooner? Absolutely. And remember that appraisal contingency includes the review department stuff after the appraisal's actually been completed. So I don't think 7 days is adequate. With the new RPA, I'll be writing probably 3 to 5 in here. 3 to 5 in here because I want to make sure 100% this is done before the appraisal takes place. And if it's not, then guess what? Who's in breach? Who's going to definitely pay for that reinspection fee of the appraisal? Clearly the seller. Clearly the seller. Because the reason that fee exists is because of the seller's failure to complete their contractual obligation on section N4.
So you put, can you put like the, average of days, if you say 3 to 5, you have to be specific. to the days.
You have to be specific. Yeah, you have to be specific. You know, you have some lazy agents who are like, so maybe I want to write 5 in there if I think the listing agent's particularly lazy. Why? I'd rather have an acceptance than have to worry than my concern over the appraisal, the possible appraisal reinspection fee, right? I'd rather have an acceptance. Now, if you're writing on one of my listings, feel free to write 3 in there all day long because I already have it. All right, next item, items included. All right, so this was very confusing, not only for buyers and sellers who have no idea what is automatically included under legal definition, but also for agents. So what I've always taught in the past is if a buyer is not certain what is included with the sale, if you as an agent are not sure what's included with the sale, does it hurt to just go ahead and write something that is covered under our definition of what should be included? Doesn't hurt, write it in. But they have made this so much easier. So let me start with telling you what the legal definition of what should be included with the sale is anything permanently affixed. Okay, so that means a television mount, but not a TV. Okay. That means appliances are definitely negotiable, right? So one of the first things you're going to do when your buyer's interested in the property is you're going to discuss with the listing agent what's included and what's not included. The listing agent actually has this in their listing contract, but it does not extend to you. It's mostly so that they can hopefully do a good job at the time that you're bringing them an offer. But it doesn't matter what they've told you verbally. It doesn't matter what's on the MLS. It doesn't matter what is in their listing contract. What's included and not included is only based on what's in the accepted contract, okay? Accepted residential purchase agreement. Yes.
Is chandelier fixed or it's?
Chandeliers are fixed, light fixtures are fixed, but oftentimes chandelier is the big problem.
Yeah.
You know, this is my family heirloom chandelier. I didn't think I had to say it wasn't included with the sale. So as a listing agent, you want to go through these things and make sure that you're clear with your seller. That way you can make it clear with your buyer and you can protect things. Otherwise, somebody's going to end up buying a chandelier after close of escrow, and it's probably not going to be the buyer or seller. It's probably going to be one of us, whoever fucked up. Yeah. And they're not cheap, are they?
No.
Yeah, yeah. I had an issue like this in Hancock Park. Thankfully, we did write what we needed to in the contract, but it was like a $25,000 chandelier. You know,
So if we were to not catch that it wasn't on there, we would have to be.
not necessarily, but you want to make your client happy, right?
Yeah.
So you'd be buying them something or giving them something. So now it's much
What about those
cleaner.
wireless security lines like Ring?
Technically, they're permanently affixed.
The wireless, so
Yeah, I have a ring. It's wireless, but it is screwed into my wall or else it wouldn't stay there. So it's permanently affixed,
okay.
right? So, but they've made that all simpler. When in doubt, be very clear, write it in, even if you think it's covered. Okay, so we have stove oven combos. I don't know why that would have to be so all inclusive, but it is. Refrigerators, wine refrigerators, and you see that it says plural. It means all of them. So if you only want one of them, or if you want to be extra careful and you want to say the refrigerator in the garage and the one in the kitchen, I would recommend going, the more conservative route and making it very clear, even if we have an option that says all of them here. Washers, dryers, dishwashers. Guess what? Most dishwashers are permanently affixed, but there are countertop versions. But now even though I know it's included in because it's permanently affixed, as a buyer's agent, I am checking dishwasher, even though I know that the dishwasher that is built in is permanently affixed, just because I don't know how skilled or knowledgeable the seller or listing agent are. So I want to protect my buyer and what they expect to receive, and I want to protect my commission. I don't want to be buying this because I didn't bother to check something I know should be covered. Just be thorough. Microwaves, we have freestanding ones and built-in ones. Built-in ones, technically, the way the law is written, they're included, but go ahead and check it off anyway. Video doorbells, see, there we go. Security camera equipment, security systems, alarms, other than separate video doorbell and camera equipment, separate meaning freestanding. But again, just be really clear, identify it. Sometimes when it's hard for me to articulate what it is we're talking about, I'll even take photos and I'll say, see attached addendum with photo of item to be included. Okay, so, don't be afraid to be specific and get creative with this. It's better to have more information than not enough. Also, I want you to know something, and we'll continue going through this list in a second. If your buyer is purchasing with a loan, okay, your buyer is the lender is in the business of loaning on real estate. They're not in the business of loaning on personal possessions, on furniture. So if you're asking for a few things that are not permanently affixed, like maybe some outdoor furniture and a sofa, or one television that's just the perfect size for an area, no problem, write it in here. Those extra things that your buyer wants to ask for. But if you're asking for the entire, like tons of furniture or the entire home furnishings, your buyer's lender is not going to be okay with your contract, because clearly for all of the furnishings, that's affecting the offer price, the accepted price, right? They're not making a loan on that. They're never going to make a loan on that. It's not okay. So if your buyer wants tons of stuff, it needs to be a separate outside agreement that has nothing to do with your residential purchase agreement. Okay, that money should not be included within the financial considerations of your RPA. Okay. All right, smart home control devices, wall-mounted brackets for video or audio equipment. We have freeform blinks here, above ground pools and spas, right? If it's in the ground, obviously it stays. I've never seen a seller actually want to dismantle an above ground pool and take it with them, but let's make it clear here. Yes.
Just going back to the whole furniture thing, if it happens to be that a lot of them are like staging, can you just put them in contact with people that are staging if they want to purchase?
Yeah, if it's stage furniture and the buyer wants some of it, they can contact the staging company. It has nothing to do with us or the seller. And most staging companies do not want to sell their furniture. Or if they do, it costs twice as much as it would actually cost to buy it. So maybe you can find out who makes it and give that information to your buyer, or maybe that can be your closing gift to them, depending, on your price and what you want to do. But most staging companies do not want to sell their furniture. Yes. Okay. Bathroom mirrors unless excluded below. So bathroom mirrors tricky, right? Some of them are permanently affixed, some of them are recessed and you wouldn't be able to tell. They look like something that's hung on the wall. Some of them are literally hung on the wall. So I love that bathroom mirrors is now included in here, because that's something, I wouldn't, even myself, I have missed thinking about when it is something that is just hung on the wall and the buyer's like, well, is that going to stay? And then really it's up to the seller at that point, because it's not included by the legal definition of what is permanently attached, right? But most of the time it looks perfect and it's sized for that space,
What
right?
about a fountain in the backyard that's not built in, but
So a fountain is a water feature. It may or may not be built in, but when in doubt, what should you do? Just write it in here. Yeah. Electric car charging systems and stations, potted trees, shrubs. Yeah, if I wanted to say something like that, I would, check this box and say all water features, fountains, whatever, Also, when you get into higher end property, a lot of times they will have, ponds or bodies of water on them, and you will have to specify, like the fish and the wildlife that live within there. You'll probably have like some weird pond or aquarium inspection. Like you'll get these fancy houses with these walls with built-in aquariums. Do you think the seller is going to take that? No. Could they take the fish? They could. So if your buyer wants them, keep them. Maybe your buyer really doesn't want them because they don't want to deal with that. And also, if the buyer is going to keep them, they probably want to know, what is maintenance like? What is it? What do I have to do? Who do I hire? Who do I pay? What is it going to cost me? Right. So there's some pretty I sold a really big estate a few years ago and it had backup generators. I swear to God, if the world ever comes to an end, I know where I'm going. Yeah. I'm like, and I know like the little, I know the low spot in the fence. I'm totally hopping and be like, so hey, I'm trespassing, but remember, I'm the one who hooked you up with this house. I don't want to die during the zombie apocalypse. Can you please take me? Yeah. So So there is weird stuff to inspect sometimes. Yes.
So if you have like a racks of restaurants and everything that I'm sure you.
Yeah, you have an AB inspection, you know?
No,
Maybe-
but you have to write it down.
Yeah,
right?
when in doubt, write it down, write it
Yeah.
down. Most people plan on leaving it because by the time it's wired, it would actually cost them more money to rip out. It won't necessarily work in their new home. And fix everything that they've ripped out than leaving it.
Don't
But be
consider that
in-
fixed, just write it down, right?
Write it down. Yeah, never leave it open to chance. Never leave it open to chance. It doesn't matter what verbal conversation you had with the other agent. It doesn't matter what was on the MLS. It doesn't matter what's in the listing contract. All that matters is in the RPA, and just make it clear. When in doubt, write it down.
If I can add this.
Yeah.
Be familiar with what is included and not. Like I was once in a deal and the agent was like, oh, okay, we would negotiate the price, like, we're just gonna give you this furniture, we're just gonna do this, and I think I was smart enough to go back, and it was already on the list that he's gonna leave it there.
Mhm.
He was trying to trick me that I probably didn't read.
Yeah. Yeah, let me,
So know what you're
I've said
doing.
it before and I will say it a bazillion more times. If you read everything, if you double check everything, you are light years ahead of your competition. Okay, you will understand more. You will beat them when it comes push to shove. You will know what you need to write. You will at least remember, there was something about this. I better double check. You're going to be a better agent. And they do try to trick you people. They do. And I'm one of them. I don't think I do it for bad, like bad reasons, but hey, I like to be thorough. And if you went ahead and signed a contract that favors my client because you didn't read it, that's not my problem. Good for me. That's my job, right? I'm not trying to be a jerk. I'm just trying to win for my client. And I'm not being dishonest. I wrote it down. You are the one who didn't bother to read it, right? So do yourself and your client a favor and read everything and ask questions.
Kristen, question for you is if it's a list for the listing side, the listing agent will probably already have any unique, or well, okay, I won't say probably, should have any unique item that's included or discluded already, right? Like when he posts it up there. So if you're doing,
Yes, and it should be part of their listing agreement. They should make everyone aware. And then if it's not reflected exactly that way in the purchase contract, they can negotiate with their seller and make a new agreement with the buyer, or they're going to introduce it in a counter offer to the purchase agreement. It has to be identified. Jason, you there? Answer?
yeah, no, that answered my question. I was just gonna say you could probably call the listing agent if you're doing like a walkthrough with a buyer before they put an offer in. You're not sure. I mean, I'm sure you could contact the listing agent and say, hey, that tree house in the backyard, is that included or not included? That kind of thing.
Exactly. So excluded items. So this is where if you're a great buyer's agent, you contacted the listing agent and you said, hey, is there anything that I need to know about, something unusual that should be included or excluded? And they're like, yes, that dining room chandelier has been in my seller's family for 5 generations and they are taking it. Then I can go to my buyer and say, hey, that beautiful chandelier, they're taking it. It's a family heirloom. Are you cool with that? Are we still going to offer the same price and terms and all of it? Well, I probably wouldn't even bring their attention to changing the price, but I'd be like, do you still want to move forward with the offer? They say, yes, great. I'm a great buyer's agent. I write for acceptance, not for a counter unless I know I'm going to get a counter. So under excluded items, I'm going to say dining room chandelier. Or if it's something I can't easily define, what am I writing? See attached addendum with photo. Okay. Allocation of costs. All right, section Q1 is natural hazard zone disclosure report, also referred to as NHD, including tax information. This has changed. Tax information used to be a separate box, an add-on. So not my problem. Escrow orders it. I don't know. Just wanted you to know the difference. And the seller typically pays for this because it is a seller by state law, seller required disclosure. Okay. And environmental, just like tax. So they used to both be little boxes that were optional. Environmental is not very standard. In all honesty, I don't even know what it is. If you want to know what an environmental add-on to an NHD is, you should probably reach out to an NHD rep. But keep in mind, whose market is it? Sellers. So when you ask for more stuff, what does that do to your buyer's offer? Makes it less attractive. Makes it less attractive. So if your buyer really wants it, maybe they can order the environmental portion themselves. And that would be a phone call to escrow. Hey, escrow, buyer didn't want to ask for it in the contract, but they do want an environmental add-on to the NHD. Can you please order it? They're going to give you a credit card for that thing. Right? Okay, so provided by, do not leave this blank, okay? So for every service provider we have to identify who is going to be providing it, or if we're the buyer and we're in this market, a lot of times we're saying seller's choice, okay? So with an NHD, regardless of if I have power as a buyer's agent or not, I am never going to specify the company. Why is that? If this is a seller required disclosure, it's because the liability for the information being accurate that's provided by whatever company it is that's used is on the seller. Now, if I, as a buyer's agent or the buyer, decide to stipulate what company and there's an issue with the validity of the information, it's pretty questionable as to, whose responsibility that is, who's liable for that misinformation, right? So I, as a buyer's agent, never stipulate what NHD company to use. Our NHD reps that come in here will tell you exactly opposite. They are wrong. Do not put that liability on yourself as a buyer's agent. Don't. You should not be stipulating what company is providing natural hazard zone disclosure report. Seller responsibility. Okay. Let's see here. So there's 2 blank sections for reports. Generally, yes.
So on the provided by, then you would put.
Seller's choice.
Seller's choice.
Mhm. Yep, shouldn't be blank, should say seller's choice. Okay. So I would be checking seller and then provided by seller's choice.
Okay.
You're welcome. All right, so I want to be very clear about something. We took the termite reports and work and who pays for it out of the contract many years ago on purpose. It used to be a mandatory part of the contract. It was mandatory or industry standard that the seller provided and paid for at least a termite report, and pretty standard that they also covered the cost of what are referred to as Section 1 items. In a termite report, there are Section 1 and Section 2 items. Section 1 are more severe, active infestation, dry rot, things like that. Section 2 are, more preventative things. We took this out of the contract because in California, our contract and real estate in general is very buyer friendly. It's not so seller friendly. And a seller has no way to cancel a deal unless the buyer fails to perform. They serve a notice to perform and issue cancellation, and the buyer chooses to sign that cancellation. So even though the seller technically has the right to cancel on a buyer for failure to perform under a contingency timeframe, they can't enforce the buyer actually granting them cancellation. They can't. Everyone has to mutually sign. Now, most of the time, buyer and seller go ahead and sign this because it's in everyone's best interest. No one can move forward. Seller can't sell their house. Buyer can't get their deposit back until we agreed to, mutually cancel this and under what terms. But, and so this was really important. And this is why we took out the termite from the contract, is because seller sells their house, gets a termite report, bad listing agent, waits until we're in escrow to get the termite report, finds out there's $35,000 in termite work to do. Perhaps the seller can't actually sell their home without bringing money in at that point. Maybe they didn't have $35,000 in equity there, or maybe they can no longer purchase the home they were planning on purchasing if, this huge dollar amount is going to be contractually required they paid that they weren't expecting, right? So if the seller can't cancel, they have this contingency, this contractual obligation in the contract that is non-negotiable for a blank check dollar amount to do this work. It can put a seller in a really bad position, right? So the state realized this. They realized that it was, an oversight. It was a poorly written part of the contract. We took termite out of the contract entirely. But you will get clients that, haven't purchased or sold in a while that are used to this being a normal part of the contract. And I wanted you to know why we took it out so you can explain it to them. And I also want you to know how we handle it now. We handle it simply as a buyer inspection. It's $99. And as a buyer's agent, I don't trust what somebody else gives me anyways. I want an independent, verifiable, report from a termite inspector that I know and trust. And if there is work to be done, most of the time we quietly negotiate it as a credit request from the seller, which they may or may not grant. And we don't do this contractually. Why? Because as soon as we put the word termite in a contract, there's another reason for it. The buyer's lender gets fucking weird. Okay. They're like, I want to see that termite report. Okay. Even I've had a deal where I countered it out because I told the agent, what are you doing? we don't do termite anymore for this reason. I countered it out and the bank was like, well, we're just not gonna loan unless you do it anyways. We had to cancel that, the buyer had to extend our escrow like by a month. The buyer had to go with a completely new lender. Completely new lender. But you know, that buyer could have been really screwed, right? So, let's say that you know, we had to do it that way. Well, what if the property had to be, you know, fumigated, had to be tented? What, now the seller has to move out of their home for 3 days, like 10 days prior to closing? A lot of times the lender won't issue loan docs until the work is done. So it just causes a lot of problems. We don't use the word termites. We hide the termite. Termite never goes in our contract. We have a termite inspection. No one except for agents, buyer and seller, ever see that report. It does not go to escrow, doesn't get paid through escrow. You never say the word termite to a lender ever. When you even negotiate for credits in relation to termite, you don't want to negotiate for the work to be done. Okay, you don't want to negotiate for the work to be done. Unless it's vacant and that's no problem and everyone's in agreement with it, maybe it's really minor. When you negotiate for that credit, we don't say what that fucking credit is for. We say a credit and a dollar amount and we tell no one about it. Okay, if we do a request for repair and we are referring to the termite report, guess what? We don't send that request for repair with the actual conclusion of our negotiation with the dollar amount to escrow. We hide that. We have to draft a separate addendum that just says seller agrees to credit buyer in the amount of $5,000 towards non-recurring closing costs. And we send that to escrow because anytime we alter financial stuff, escrow has to see it and the lender has to see it. And we need to hide termite. Yes, I saw your hand.
When at the beginning of the sale, if the seller says as is, no seller credit given,
All contracts, it literally says in our contract that the offer is for as is. What does that mean? It means that a buyer should not expect to get a credit on something that they know about or can see. Okay, does that mean that they can't inspect or ask for credit in relation to something that they can't see or is much worse than, you know, you'd be able to tell from looking at? No, it doesn't. But a buyer should never be making an offer, okay, expecting to ask for something that they are aware of or can see. So if we walk into a property and we can see a huge discolored portion of the hardwood in the front living room, I tell my buyer, we need to make our offer with your offer price reflecting that. We do not ask for that. We know about that. We know about that. And when I see counter offers with the terms as is in them, I'm like, I don't care. All contracts are as is. Let me show you. It does not keep us from asking for anything. It does not keep us from inspecting for anything. And as a seller, you always have the option to say yes or no. You always, everything is negotiable in real estate, right? So besides state requirements. So, you know, what we should just keep in mind and what we should be explaining to our clients is, if you know about it, we shouldn't be asking for anything in relation to it. Okay. What if the seller says that there's a problem with something, but they don't know what the problem is? I don't think that I would include that because there's no monetary value attached to it, right? There's no establishment of what that problem actually is or how much it would cost to cure it. Yes.
if it's something that is not visible to the eye, it means they go in and then the inspection guy says, listen, there's a foundation problem. I've seen that. Is that something that the seller can, you know, it's $100,000, I don't want to sell it. Is that something they can back out?
Yeah, so the seller has not only no obligation to provide credits or reduction of purchase price or do a repair, they actually don't have a contractual obligation to respond to a buyer's request for repair for credit. Okay, so a seller can choose to not respond. And I've seen buyer's agents are like, I've got a notice to perform. They didn't even respond to my request for repair. And I'm like, and they're like, they can't do that. I'm like, yeah, they can. They're not required to respond. They responded. It's very clear how they responded. Move on, get out. All right, let's see here. Where are we? Oh, so we've already talked about smoke alarms, CO2 detectors, water heater bracing. Here it's talking about what? Just who pays, just who pays. And remember, who typically pays for this one? Seller. Can buyer pay for it? Yes. Can they split it somehow? Yes. It's not industry standard, and that's because we don't typically know what that price is going to be. So we leave it as sellers. Also, why would a buyer pay for or take the liability of work being done to a property they don't own yet? Right? Not a good idea.
Yeah.
Government required point of sale inspections and reports. That's for at least Los Angeles. Every city, some cities have 0. Some cities have a building report. City of Los Angeles has a building report and certificate of compliance requirements. Okay, there, every city has different ones. Who's a good person to ask if you don't know if there's any specific city requirements for a close? Escrow officer, or an agent who specializes heavily in that area, but escrow officer's always going to know. You can also call a retrofitting company. Okay. Let me see. The only one I can think of off the top of my head that has a website is Metro Retro. So if you Googled Metro Retro and you're like, hey, I'm selling a house in Culver City, is an automatic gas shutoff valve. So Culver City is its own city, not City of LA. Is that required? Technically, it's not. It's not. So they would tell you that, and then you know, like, oh, I can ask for it, but I can't necessarily expect it. All right. So seller typically pays for that, and for the government required point of sale inspections and reports. Government required point of sale corrective remedial action. So we talked about this one first, the report. So I told you the process for a certificate of compliance in LA is a retrofitting company comes out and they will either do work and then certify it or certify it. So the first one's asking for the cost for the certification, the report. The second one is asking about who's going to pay for the work if any is required. Who's going to typically pay for this? It's going to be the same as the report of the seller. Yeah. Okay, escrow fees. All right. I love that this is here now, okay? Because this used to be a constant like issue. Buyer and seller have different escrow fees. And a lot of old school agents, they would write that they are to split the cost or pay 50-50. That is not the case. What does that mean? You couldn't even do it anyways, because you have to have these estimated numbers far prior to closing. What does this mean? It means like at the very end, when we know what every actual cost is, we add everything up and divide by 2, right? That's paying 50-50. That's not even possible. So what I've always taught everyone is they need to say each to pay their own as customary. We now actually have that option. Yay, the state of California finally got as smart as me. So now you can check this box. Great. Escrow holder. Who chooses escrow? Typically the seller. Not always, but most of the time, because it's a seller's market. Owner's title insurance policy. All right, so I don't love this. I think it used to be written better. There's 2 types of title policies in most escrows, okay? 2 types. One is for both buyer and seller, and it's referred to as the owner's policy. One is for the buyer's lender if they're purchasing with a loan. If they're not purchasing with a loan, they don't need it. So who typically pays for the owner's title policy? The seller, right? The name kind of gives it away. Now, there is some regional differences in all of what I'm teaching you right now, okay? Northern California buyers typically pay for this owner's policy. I grew up in Redondo and Manhattan Beach, and Redondo, Manhattan, Hermosa, and we'll get to this in a little bit. They have city transfer taxes. So some cities don't have transfer taxes at the close of a sale. County always does. LA County has a transfer tax. Some cities do. Typically, at least in LA, in this area, seller pay for both city and county transfer tax. Well, in my hometown areas, buyer and seller split the city transfer tax and the seller pays for the county. Did I see a hand somewhere? Yes.
If the seller chooses the escrow, and obviously the escrow is, friend with the agent and all that, is it a disadvantage to the buyer or no?
100%. So the definition of an escrow holder should be always begin with a third neutral party. They are not. My escrow officer's not. I wasn't when I was an escrow officer. I like who I like. I'm friends with them. They give me business. Do I try to do an equally good job? I did try to do an equally good job for everyone involved. But when push comes to shove and you have time to do one thing and need to do 5, who are you going to do it for? Probably the person that's most important to you, which in that case is usually the listing agent. And so you ever feel like you're not getting fair or equal treatment from an escrow officer? Use exactly these words. I thought escrow was a third neutral party. I don't feel as though I'm receiving fair and equal treatment. Has the listing agent already received their whatever? I'd like mine as well, please. I guarantee you, you will instantaneously get whatever it is you need. Instantaneously, with a smile. Let's see here. But yes, typically escrow favors the seller side. Yeah. Let's see. So buyer's lender title insurance policy, it's already written on here. Buyer pays for that. Why? It's a completely buyer related fee. If they weren't purchasing with a loan, there would not even be a need for this type of title policy. Okay. Oops. Sorry about that. All right. Okay. We just talked about city and transfer taxes. So I just told you what's typical here. Who pays city? Who pays county? Seller. Seller. Okay. Some cities do not have transfer tax. Beverly Hills does not. But LA does, and it is steep. It is much higher than the county transfer tax. Okay. It is a lot of money. So if you mess up, the buyer's gonna be mad. Your seller's gonna be mad. Whoever, whoever's paying that shouldn't be paying. Fee for HOA doc prep. This used to be boxes of buyer, seller, other. Seller should be paying for HOA documents, right? They can reuse them if they don't close escrow with your current buyer. This is a California state requirement that, for a seller disclosure or seller report to be provided to the buyer in the sale and purchase of a condominium. So of course it should be the seller. HOA certification fee. This is the only HOA related cost that is buyers. This is not always required. An HOA cert is something a buyer's lender will require. Buyer's lender will require. So they will typically handle ordering that directly from the HOA, but not all lenders are great. So if you're representing a buyer and you're selling a condo, you'll probably want to ask them, a week or so into your escrow, have you ordered the HOA cert? Have you ordered the HOA cert? Because this is typically the thing that they're missing. And it can mess you up because who gives you HOA docs? HOA management company. And do they care? They do not. They are minimum wage grouchy ladies or men sitting around in some cubicle office way out where, and everyone hates them because they suck. And they're like, so it's sort of like dealing with DMV employees. Private transfer fees. This is an HOA related cost. Sometimes an HOA will just charge a transfer fee. Who typically pays for this? Seller typically pays for this. Again, it's an HOA cost. And when your buyer sells it, they will pay for it as a seller. 16 and 17 are blank fees here. Not typically completed, but you can use these here. Home warranty plan. So who typically pays for home warranty, guys? That's right, seller typically pays. However, it doesn't cost a lot. And in a seller's market, if I advise my buyer to waive anything, it's usually this, I'll buy it for them. The cost, sometimes the cost is associated with the actual type of property and square footage and what features it has there. It generally costs somewhere between $400 and $1,000 on a very large property, or an income property. It can cost significantly more. You can get estimated fees from the home warranty company of your choice that you're recommending. Usually on their website, you can enter the property information in and they'll give you a pretty good estimate. Cost not to exceed is very important because the seller is only contractually bound to pay for as much as you write in here. So if you write $500 in here, but the home warranty actually costs $800, is the seller going to pay that extra $300? They are not. Your buyer will be responsible for that, but more likely you're going to be embarrassed, or your buyer's going to, or if you tell your buyer, they're going to be mad, you're probably going to buy it. So you're probably going to cough up the difference. So make sure this number is correct. And when in doubt, which we do, estimate on the high side. Okay, issued by, and we're going to select a company here. So buyers typically have no idea what home warranty company they want to use unless they've previously owned and had a really good or bad experience with their previous home warranty policy. So if they don't have a preference, I recommend the company I like, because I have a relationship with that rep, and if my client has problems later down the road after they've owned for a while and they need to make a claim, usually that rep is willing to help me because I refer them so much business. And what does that do? That's good for me because it helps my client, which helps me keep a good relationship and hopefully get more referral business and their future business. Right. Other terms. I told you there are a lot of times I use other terms to freeform write things. I do want you, as a newer agent, if you are, to be very careful when you write things here. They have to be extremely clear, but even if they are as clear as possible, you might not have the knowledge base you need to know if it affects something else within the contract terms that would also need to be addressed in here. Okay. So if you're using other terms, I want you to make sure that someone very knowledgeable with contract looks at this, you explain the situation to them, not just have them look at your wording, explain to them what it is you're trying to do, have them look at your wording and let you know if that's adequate or not. Okay. I told you when I have to calculate residential leasebacks or rent backs where the seller stays in possession of the property after it closes. That because I don't have the financial terms I need most of the time for the consideration there, I use other terms, or more likely that language is so long it won't fit here and I'm using an addendum. Okay. All right. So property addenda and advisories, and we're almost done here, guys. So if you have a special type of sale, a special consideration, you're going to check these boxes and these forms. Anytime you see one of these car form acronyms and you check a box next to it, it's going to auto populate in the main transaction folder of your transaction, right? So when you're done writing your RPA, you need to make sure you go back out and complete all the documents that may have been added since you've now checked boxes within this contract. And some of them are listed here: probate agreement, purchase addendum. Okay, so if the property is probate, there's more than one type of probate. There's an addendum for that. If you don't know what it is, that's okay. I'm not going to explain it because that is a huge class. One of them is very easy, like a standard sale. The other is extremely complicated. There is a recorded version online on YouTube if you would like to know a little bit more about that. But until you have your RPA mastered, I wouldn't recommend going into probate sales. Okay. And if you happen to have a deal come up where you have to deal with a probate, your mentor is going to help you. Or if you are not in the mentorship program, you need help, I highly recommend inviting an agent you like and respect that does know probate to be your co-rep agent. Cough up some of that cash to actually close it and close it properly. Manufactured home purchase agreement. This is for a mobile home. I've never sold one, but there is a very big difference between what we can sell and can't sell. So most mobile homes are actually considered personal property, more like a car sale. We are not licensed for that type of sale. What's the difference? When can we sell a mobile home? Only if the mobile homeowner actually owns the ground upon which that mobile home sits, right? If you think about being a real estate agent, what do you always need to have? You always need to have a lot. You always need to have an interest in a lot, in a parcel, okay? So, you know, a mobile home sitting upon a leased, spot in an RV park, a mobile home park, you can't sell that because that is just a piece of property. A piece of personal property. Yeah. Tenant occupied property addendum. We've already talked about that. I'm not going to talk about it again, but I think it's in here twice because it's so important. So I imagine if you check it in the previous section, it's going to be checked here as well, but just a second place. Tenancy in common purchase addendum. Tenancy in common is a little bit like buying a condo, okay? Only there's a difference in the setup of the bylaws and how it's governed, and I don't know exactly what that is. What I do want you to know is when you see something that says it's a tenancy in common, it will likely say co-op, okay? So you see co-op here and it's different, okay? Stock cooperative purchase agreement. There's even more structures within HOAs, although it's not common, than are listed here, okay? Than are listed here. So when you are looking at an MLS listing, or the listing agent tells you something like, oh, well, it's actually a co-op, or it's actually, a stock interest. All of these terms, if they're not saying it's a normal, just an HOA, if they're not just using the term HOA, there can be implications on the loan. Only certain lenders, very few lenders, will make loans on these types of properties, okay? And there are different closing requirements. So, like for instance, Marina City Club has a land lease, so there's special considerations and loans for that. We talked about that last class briefly, just when we were talking about APN numbers. If you don't remember that, that's okay. Ocean Towers, I sold the property there last year. That's a stock cooperative. They actually have to have an attorney draft some documents that need to be signed and recorded, and it takes a certain time frame. So and the listing agent had no idea what she was doing. She didn't tell me any of this. Thank God my buyer was cash and was okay with it. But it delayed our close. It delayed our close by almost a month. And they were the ones pushing to, they were like, we want to close in 10 days. And I'm like, okay, okay. And push comes to shove, it's their fault. My buyer doesn't care, right? My buyer's cash, my buyer doesn't care. But, these are just things you need to be aware of. So anytime and this is going to happen all the time, your lower price condo buyers are gonna be like, look at this amazing condo on the MLS. Well, it doesn't tell them what it tells us under private remarks, right? And it's actually a co-op and they can't get a loan on it. Okay, if they start looking at a lot of these, and they are generally lower priced because they're harder to sell because most lenders won't do loans on this type of property, right? So your buyer needs to be aware of that, and then they might need to go and get pre-approved by a new lender. Most listing agents that do this type of property are very well versed. There's few of them out there, and they do the bulk of this type of sale. And they will actually have referrals to lenders for you. However, I hate using anyone the seller recommends to me when I rep the buyer. Why? Because they have allegiance to the seller. I have a great lender. He gave me a referral to someone that does this type of stuff. So if you ever need a co-op lender, let me know. I don't remember the information offhand, but I do have a resource in my email somewhere. Section B, other addenda. So you can have an addendum. Like I said, anytime you need to write something that won't fit in the contract, or you don't like the terms, your options here. Sometimes I don't like any of the options that are available to me for something. And you know what? As long as I'm not violating any law, that's totally fine. We can custom write how we want the terms to be. And so I'll use an addendum because there's not enough room usually under these sections, like other terms or blank spaces for me to fit it in. Sometimes I'm writing a backup offer, okay? Or I'm countering because, an offer's been accepted and, the listing agent has offered my buyer backup. So sometimes I'm just writing a straight up offer and I know it's for backup though. Well, guess what? If I'm not adding the backup offer addendum with my offer, the seller's gonna have to counter me. They can't accept my offer because I didn't supply them everything they needed. So if you're writing a backup offer addendum needs to be written. Septic, well, property monument, and propane addendum. Not very common. We don't have a whole lot of well property, but now they've lumped septic and well together. I think the forms used to be different. So wells stuff often happens out in Malibu. Septic happens more often than you think, especially like in the hills around here. So there is an addendum for that. Oh man, and I don't know what it looks like, and I hope I don't have to anytime soon because the inspections on that are such a bitch and so gross and time consuming and what if, and sometimes you just can't even find the actual septic tank that is currently being used. The property's 50 years old and they've gone through a few and capped them off, and you have to dig down to open it to inspect it. So, you're hiring like digging companies to now go dig up 5 to try to, 10 to find the one that's active and inspect it. And those things are sealed, they break. So now the buyer has to pay for the repair to the old one because can't leave it open for raw sewage, environmental hazard, right? Have fun with that. So there's a septic addendum, well, property monuments. I'm not sure that I would know what that is. I guess if there's a monument on the property, and propane addendum. Clearly there were some problems and some lawsuits in the state of California having to do with property monuments and propane. I don't know what they were, and hopefully we never have to find out. If that's the case, Michael Rosales would be your best bet to discuss something like that. Short sale addendum, not happening a whole lot in our market now, but that could change if you're ever doing a short sale. I did one last year. You have to do a short sale addendum. And from what I recall, it was actually pretty user-friendly. It was easy for me to complete my very first time taking a look at it and doing it. Court confirmation addendum. So we talked about probate a little bit. I told you it's very complicated and there's 2 types. There's one with, and the difference is court confirmation required or not? If it's not, it's like a standard sale with an addendum. If it is, it's so complicated. So I'm very happy that we now have an addendum. This is new. I don't know what it says, but it's better than what we had before, which was nothing, which didn't clue you into all of these special different procedures. It's not a standard sale. There's an actual bid. You can have an escrow and then get overbid in court. Again, very complicated. I'm not going to go into it, but if you're starting to look at probate ever, or after you master the RPA, maybe you want to print out some of these less common forms that are listed here and take a look at them. Buyer intent to exchange, seller intent to exchange addendum. No problem. This doesn't mean a whole lot of anything to us other than there's something called the 1031 tax deferred exchange. It applies only to income property. So what happens is a property owner can avoid paying capital gains taxes if they park the profit they've made from selling their income property and purchase an equal or higher priced property within a certain time frame. Okay, an exchange company handles most of this. The thing that would affect us most as agents is the time frame. If we're helping that seller, we're probably in a very, there's a lot of pressure, especially in a market that's geared towards sellers, where it's not easy to get your buyer offer accepted, to find that property for your buyer and close on it in time so that they don't have to pay those taxes. Which if you wait till the last minute, it doesn't give you a whole lot of leverage with inspection negotiations, right? You need to close or else you're gonna have to pay a lot of taxes. What is important about this is identifying that there's an exchange. Why? It's just legally required if there's an exchange taking place that we put it into the contract, because what needs to happen is both buyer and seller have to sign documents. Whoever is conducting the exchange, that's who pays for it. Okay, that's who pays for it. That's standard. But we have to have contractual language in our contract, and you usually get that from the client's exchange company. They'll give you exact wording for a clause that says, basically, the other party, if they're a buyer or seller, they're going to cooperate at no cost to them with our client. They could be buyer or seller, right? We don't know which one we're doing until we're doing it. They're going to cooperate with that process and sign the documents necessary to sign in order to complete it. So, and it probably says something like that. These forms, like I said, are new, so I haven't looked at them. And next month we'll start taking a brief look at some of these documents. But it probably says something in there like that. It probably has language in there like that, which is great, because if you're a new agent, you're doing an exchange, and there's an exchanger, you probably don't even know you need to put language like this into the contract, and it's very important for your client. So they're trying to make these outlying situations a little bit more visible to us, so that we're less likely to have no idea, no clue that they exist. Right. Other addenda. I know we talked about that. Buyer and seller advisories. All right. See these things that are automatically already checked. These are always required. They're going to auto populate with the residential purchase agreement. We don't need to worry about it. I do not recommend adding things you don't need to. So one of the most common mistakes I see, and it's annoying when I see a contract, is someone will just decide to require a statewide buyer and seller advisory form, which is like 10 to 4, it's 14 pages long now, and it's just advisory. Okay, it's 14 pages long yet. Now it is required as part of the disclosure package. So why do I want to add an extra 14 pages to a residential purchase agreement? It's annoying, and it can cause errors between other parties. Escrow is not used to this being attached. So maybe they send the residential purchase agreement over to the lender, but they don't give them this 14 pages. The lender goes through their loan process. You need loan approval, and the underwriter kicks it back because the contract's not complete. Now we have to resubmit, and we have a 3-day delay. So don't add things that aren't necessary to add, okay? Don't go and complicate things further. We address what we need to address. Sometimes less is more. Let's see. Wildfire disaster advisory. We're only going to know about the necessity of this once we have a natural hazard zone disclosure report, which, as the buyer's agent who's writing this document, probably isn't going to know about, right? So I'm not adding this. There's already a required advisory. If we need it, we'll do it during the course of escrow. The only thing I would say that we should add, if it's necessary, is a trust advisory. When do we add the trust advisory to an RPA? Anytime the seller holds title to the property in a trust. Okay, so if you look up vesting, you look up who the owner of the property is, and it's a trust, we need to add the TA, the trust advisory, to our RPA. Okay. REOs are not common. I'm not going to go into that now. Again, short sale information advisory. If you have a short sale, that's also going to be few and far between. You'd include this advisory. Same thing with probate. No idea what's going on here. Okay, so remember, we have already gone over all of this. All of this is just the backup language that supports and further explains the terms that we have just gone through in those first couple of pages. It just puts them all out there at once. I think it was very confusing before. People would forget to fill out entire sections of the RPA because all of these important things are scattered all over the place in between long sections of advisory where we don't need, it's all boilerplate. A lot of it is circumstantial stuff that is rare and not common. So we're not even looking at this. And then here's this one important term stuck into this mountain of boilerplate bullshit we don't even need to look at, right? So it was very easy for people to mix things up. And the way we've structured it now is everything that needs to be identified typically, and even in some fairly rarer circumstances, is right up front, all in one section, so that you get all of the information you need. And then we have, the explanation section. So I have talked to you about, I've given you my own explanation of each section. I've told you what is typical, why we fill things out a certain way, why we omit certain things, what we need to think about. But what I'd like for you guys to do now is I'd like for you to go and I'd like for you to read, from section 5 out, because it's just going to further your understanding and cement your understanding of what we've just talked about and why. Okay, so read everything. And then if you're in the mentorship program, what do we do now that you've taken RPA class, part 1 and part 2? You should go to your mentor and ask them to do a practice RPA with you. And you're probably going to teach them a little bit, because this was just released 2 days ago. It might be the first time they've seen it. And in fact, if they don't know or they haven't seen it, have them watch my class with you, rewatch part 1 and rewatch part 2 together, and then go ahead and do a practice RPA. Okay, I've had more calls from seasoned agents in the last 2 days than I've ever had before, because they're like, I've never seen this before. Is the seller asking for a credit? I'm like, no. Does the seller ever ask for a fucking credit? Or a buyer ever ask for a fucking credit, especially in a seller's market? No, it's just on there so that idiots don't miss it now. But no, if it doesn't apply, we don't check it. So your mentor very likely will need help with this as well. Have them plug into it and watch the class with you. Make sure you do your practice repetition stuff. If you don't cement what you've learned, what you're learning here, and actually do it, you're not going to be ready to do it when the time comes. You're not going to be able to explain it to your client when it's time to do it, right? So go make sure you understand it. If you have any questions, last week I got a whole bunch of text messages. Do not text me. Do not text me. If you have questions, you are welcome to email me, okay, to set a time to talk about that, especially on Thursdays right after class. If it's not a quick question, guys, I've been in here for 2 hours. My phone has 25 messages on it I need to get back to right now, and I'm late. So I'll sit here for 10-15 minutes. If you have a quick question, feel free. If you have a more lengthy question or question off topic, please email me. Does everyone here have my email?
Yes.
Okay. Kristen, CHRISTEN @lanative.homes.
At LA what?
LAnative.homes, plural homes. And where
Thank
am I?
you.
You're welcome. They are on YouTube. If you search my name, Kristen Toll, you will find them.
Kristen, you rock. Thank you.
Bye, guys.
That's why I asked you, I'm like, I feel like I see.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Says Christian.
Oh, congratulations.